Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into some really compelling and sometimes quite intense material you've shared.
hmm
It's all focused on the operations of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, specifically looking at reports from the Trump administration's second term kicking off in January 2025.
Right. And we've got quite a stack of sources here, things from Time, CNN, The Washington Post, even Wikipedia, to help us really get into the reported shifts and actions taken by ICE during that time.
Yeah, exactly. And our mission for you today is, well, to cut through all the noise, pull out the most important insight.
To the core of it.
Right. Give you a clear, concise understanding of these really significant changes and their reported consequences so you can grasp the big picture quickly without getting sort of bogged down in all the details. Okay, let's dig in.
Let's do it.
So looking through the sources, the first thing that just jumps out is this really profound transformation within ICE. How would you characterize that overall shift? What was the kind of defining feature?
Well, what's really striking is how consistent the sources are. They all describe ICE being fundamentally reshaped, turned into an extremely aggressive enforcement agency.
So not just minor adjustments.
No, no, not at all. This was like a deep systemic overhaul. Changes to its core strategy, its day-to-day operations, everything.
What did that mean on the ground? In practical terms, what was the immediate impact?
It really signaled a dramatic move towards much more robust, much more widespread enforcement, and that led directly to, well, record-breaking arrest and detention rates.
Wow.
And also just a remarkably expanded scope of activity for the agency itself. It was a very clear signal of heightened intensity.
Okay, to really get a handle on the scale of this, we need to look at the numbers. The sources talk about a massive surge in arrests. What kind of figures are we actually talking about here? Daily figures.
Yeah, the reports are quite striking. They indicate an average of about 800 arrests every single day.
800 a day.
And some internal quotas, according to the sources, reportedly push those targets even higher, maybe up to 1,200, even 1,500 daily.
That's huge.
It is. And each of ICE's field offices, there are about 25 of them, was apparently given minimum arrest targets, often around, say, 75 arrests per office per day.
That's an incredible volume. Were there specific large-scale operations mentioned? Initiatives that were driving these numbers?
Yes, definitely. Operations like Operation Safeguard were cited quite often. These were described as coordinated raids across major cities.
Right.
So, for instance, the sources we have specifically mentioned 538 arrests just in Boston, Denver, and Philadelphia, all part of these kinds of targeted efforts.
And this aggressive approach, it wasn't just about more arrests. It was also about where IC could operate. What did the sources say about the agency's reach? Expanding into places that were previously off limits.
That's a really important point. It raises questions about, operational boundaries. ICE reportedly gained new authority to operate and, crucially, make arrests in locations previously considered sensitive.
Sensitive how? Like what?
Well, we're talking about places like schools, churches, hospitals, places where previously administrative restrictions largely kept them out. That was a significant shift.
Okay. And was it just ICE doing this?
Yeah.
Or were other agencies pulled in?
Connecting this to the bigger picture, no, it definitely wasn't just ICE acting solo. The sources point to significantly broader participation from other federal agencies.
Like who?
Well, the DEA, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, even the IRS and ATF were reportedly collaborating in various ways.
Wow.
And on top of that, there was a really substantial increase in local police involvement that happened through these 287G agreements.
Right, the deputization agreements.
Exactly. They essentially deputized local officers to act as federal immigration agents. And those agreements reportedly expanded to cover over 700 jurisdictions, a huge jump.
Okay, so a much wider net, geographically and institutionally. The sources also seem to point to a shift in who was being targeted. Can you talk about the focus on worksite raids and, maybe surprisingly, individuals without major criminal records?
Yeah, that's another fascinating aspect. There was this kind of dual focus. ICE dramatically ramped up worksite raids, detaining undocumented workers.
Okay.
But interestingly, the sources report, well, less emphasis on actually prosecuting the employers themselves. Very few charges apparently were brought against the businesses involved in many cases.
And what about the individuals being arrested? What was their background, generally speaking, according to the reports?
That's a really significant detail. A large percentage of the arrests, according to these sources, targeted individuals with no criminal records at all, or maybe only minor offenses, things like traffic violations.
Really? No criminal record.
Yeah. Roughly 52% of detainees reportedly lacked any prior criminal convictions, which, that really highlights a shift in the profile of who was being detained compared to maybe previous enforcement priorities.
So with this massive surge in arrests, this expanded reach, ICE obviously needed new tools, new methods, not just for tracking people, but processing them,
Got it.
deporting them. What did the sources say about new technologies or legal justifications being used?
Right. This gets into the mechanics, the how of it all. New data sharing agreements were reportedly set up with agencies like the IRS and the Social Security Administration.
IRS and SSA, how did that work?
Well, it allowed ICE to leverage taxpayer data, Social Security information, and reportedly, in some cases, even revoke Social Security numbers associated with inaccurate information. That's a powerful tool.
Definitely. And when it came to the actual deportations, given the sheer volume, how were those handled? Any changes there?
Yes, the sources point to a couple of things. The use of military flights for deportations, which suggests scale and perhaps urgency.
Military flights.
Yeah. And also specific deals mentioned with El Salvador using something called the Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged gang-affiliated immigrants.
The Alien Enemies Act, isn't that quite old? Like from wartime?
Exactly. It's a law typically reserved for wartime situations involving nationals of hostile countries. So applying it here in an immigration context was reported as particularly notable and, well, legally aggressive. It signals a pretty robust expansion of deportation mechanisms and justifications.
Okay, so with this huge increase in arrests, where were people being held? I mean, detention capacity must have been strained. What did the sources say about that?
That's a crucial question, the infrastructure piece. ICE reportedly had to reopen older detention facilities that had been closed and also open entirely new high-capacity centers just to handle the influx.
Any specific examples?
Yeah, one cited was a new 1,000-bed facility opened in Newark, New Jersey. And the overall numbers, they really tell the story. Detention figures reportedly hit a 5-year high, around 43,700 detainees by late February 2025.
43,700. That's a lot of people. Now, unsurprisingly, strategies this aggressive, they must have sparked reactions, criticisms. What were the main concerns highlighted in the sources you looked at?
Oh, absolutely. Connecting this to the broader societal impact, this strategy ignited significant concerns, particularly around civil liberties.
In what way?
Well, strong criticisms reported regarding things like warrantless arrests, the operations in those sensitive locations. We talked about schools, hospitals,
Right.
and also the involvement of deputized local police. Critics argued these tactics led to racial profiling and really eroded trust between communities and law enforcement.
And beyond civil liberties, what about humanitarian concerns? Were those raised?
Definitely very widely reported. There were accounts of arrests happening during routine check-ins, when people were trying to comply with previous orders.
Oh, wow.
And also the detention of unaccompanied children. These reports raised widespread fears about potential mass family separations and the psychological trauma associated with that.
And that point about employers,
Yeah.
the worksite raids, what was the follow-through on accountability there?
Yeah, that was a consistent point of criticism noted in the sources. Despite these very rigorous workplace raids targeting workers, the businesses hiring undocumented workers largely seemed to avoid serious charges or penalties. That discrepancy was frequently highlighted.
So lots of pushback.
Yes. Overall, the strategy described resulted in numerous legal challenges, significant public protests, and just a growing widespread concern over human rights and civil liberties implications.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. What does this all mean for you, our listener? We've just done a pretty deep dive into the specific actions, the reported consequences of IC operations under the Trump administration's second term based on these sources. From that dramatic surge in arrests, the expanded reach into sensitive places, new data tools, even military deportations. These sources really paint a picture of an agency that was, well, drastically reshaped.
Yeah, and I think this deep dive really shows how high-level policy decisions can translate very directly into concrete changes on the ground, changes in enforcement that really impact individual lives.
Right.
And they spark these broad, important societal discussions around things like civil liberties, humanitarian standards, the role of law enforcement.
Absolutely. And as you reflect on all this information, maybe here's a final provocative thought to leave you with. How do these reported shifts in enforcement strategy, the tactics, the targets, the sheer scale of it, how do they influence the ongoing national conversation we have about immigration itself? and maybe what could be the longer-term implications for communities, sure, but also for that delicate balance of power between federal agencies and local jurisdictions. Definitely something to mull over.